Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
Have you ever found yourself trusting a random stranger's online review way more than some slick multi-million-dollar ad campaign? Well, today we're diving into a book called Absolute Value, and it argues that the internet has completely rewired how we make decisions. So yeah, get ready to unlearn pretty much everything you thought you knew about marketing.
You know, for decades, marketing was kind of like a religion. It had its own sacred texts, its own commandments, and there were these fundamental truths about how we as customers behave that basically nobody dared to question. I mean, these were the pillars holding up the entire industry.
And right at the very heart of this old playbook was this one simple but really powerful idea. You, the consumer, are irrational. The thinking was that you're just this creature of habit and emotion, easily swayed by some clever packaging or a catchy slogan. You know that candy bar you grab at the checkout? That's the old marketing playbook in action, right there. But what happens when the entire game gets flipped on its head? What happens when, with just one little search, you can get access to a global database of user reviews, expert ratings, and even raw performance data? All of a sudden, those old tricks, they don't seem to work so well, do they? Okay, so let's break down this old marketing gospel. These 5 mantras, they were the cornerstones of business strategy for a really long time. And it makes sense, right? In a world with limited information, a strong brand was a shortcut to trust. Loyalty, that was your fortress against competitors. And positioning was the whole ballgame. But what if the very ground we're standing on is shifting? To really see just how much things have changed, I want to tell you a true story, and it really does feel like a glitch in the marketing matrix. It's a story that just shatters all those old rules we just talked about. So picture this. It's the early 2000s. There's this little-known Taiwanese company called ASUS, and they decide they're going to take on the Goliaths of the PC industry. You can imagine, everyone thought they were crazy. People were like, you have no brand, you have no ad budget, you have zero chance. And yet, fast forward to 2013, and they were the #3 tablet maker in the entire world. So how on earth did a company with basically no brand recognition manage to topple industry giants? The answer? Well, it's at the very heart of what we're talking about today. So what was their secret? How do you possibly win when you're playing a completely different game from everyone else? Well, the big secret is that we've changed. That's the answer. We don't rely on marketers to tell us what to buy anymore. We've become our own experts, our own critics, our own tastemakers. Think about buying a car back in, say, the 90s. You'd rely on the brand's reputation, maybe a slick TV ad, right? That's what the authors call relative value. Now, think about buying a car today. You're deep diving into crash test readings, you're reading owner forums, you're comparing fuel efficiency data down to the decimal. That is absolute value. You see the difference? You're no longer guessing, you're knowing. And that's all absolute value is. It's the truth, plain and simple, unvarnished, unfiltered. It's not about the hype, it's about the real-world experience. It's the huge difference between what a company claims their product is and what its actual customers say it is. Now, to see just how powerful this shift to absolute value really is, let's look at this fascinating experiment where a classic marketing trick was put to the test. And, well, it failed spectacularly. Have you ever been to a restaurant and noticed there's one ridiculously expensive bottle of wine on the menu? That is the compromise effect at work. It's a classic psychological trick designed to make that second most expensive bottle look like a total bargain. And for a long, long time, it worked like a charm. But what happens when you introduce this little thing called the internet into the equation? Researchers recently redid this classic experiment with cameras, but they added a modern twist. This time, they let people read online reviews before they made their choice. And the result? The compromise effect, it vanished. Poof, just gone. The moment people had access to the absolute value of each camera, the real reviews, the old marketing trick just lost all of its power. The truth, it turns out, is a pretty powerful antidote to manipulation. I mean, this is a total game changer, right? In this new age of absolute value, our decisions aren't really being shaped by those old, clever marketing tricks anymore. We're in the driver's seat now, and we've got the data to prove it. So what does this mean for the old guard of marketing? Well, it means a famous logo isn't a guarantee of quality anymore. Blind loyalty? that's kind of becoming a thing of the past. You can't just position your brand as the most reliable when 1,000 owner reviews say the exact opposite. And persuasion, it just loses its sting when the facts are literally a click away.
The bottom line is, we are not passive consumers anymore, just waiting to be told what to buy. We are active researchers. We're crowdsourcing our decisions. We're tapping into the collective wisdom of the entire internet.
So this leaves us with a really big question. Where does this leave the almighty brand? In a world where quality is king and transparency is the law of the land, what's a brand name really worth anymore? It's something to think about.
Think about the last time you bought something. Anything, really. Did you just walk into a store and grab the first thing you saw? Or did you pull out your phone first? Something really fundamental has shifted in how we all make choices. We've kind of moved from a world of relative decisions to one of absolute value. So what does that even mean? Let's dig in.
And probably the best way to really get our heads around this huge shift is to solve a little mystery. It's the story of how a company that honestly was a complete unknown to the public managed to go head-to-head with the biggest names in the PC world and win. So, how on earth did they pull it off? Okay, so meet our underdog, a company called Asus. Now, before they were a household name, they were basically a behind-the-scenes player. They were a contract manufacturer, which means they built the parts that went inside the computers for all those other famous brands. So while the tech industry knew their quality was top-notch, to you and me, the average person buying a laptop, Asus might as well have not existed.
So yeah, how did this total unknown manage to pull off one of the biggest upsets in the tech industry? Well, this is their incredible underdog story.
Just look at the speed of this. It's wild. Before 2007, they're a nobody in the consumer world. Then they launched this tiny, kind of cheap laptop called the EEPC, and get this, their competitors literally laughed at them. But by the end of 2008, they'd sold nearly 5 million of them. A few years later, they're a top 5 PC maker and a top 3 tablet maker, just blowing past these huge established brands. I mean, this just wasn't supposed to happen. The secret to their success, it turns out, wasn't just about having a slightly better product. It was about a deep, fundamental change in our behavior, a massive shift from thinking in terms of relative value to something called absolute value. Think about how we used to shop, right? We'd walk into a store, see maybe 2 toasters on the shelf, and we'd compare them. We'd have to rely on a brand name we recognized, or maybe our own past experience. Our decision was totally relative to the very limited options right there in front of us. But now, we use what's called absolute evaluation. We pull out our phones, and in seconds, we can access reviews, expert opinions, YouTube videos, all to find out a product's true quality, its absolute value. And this quote right here, it just nails it. Our decisions are no longer trapped by what a single store decides to stock on its shelves. We can now look way beyond that local context and find the best information out there anywhere in the world. And this isn't just a cool theory. There's some fascinating research that proves this shift is actually happening. It all has to do with a classic psychological trick that all of a sudden has just stopped working. So let me ask you this. If you're choosing between 2 cameras, could the simple presence of a third, super expensive one make you switch your choice between the first 2? You'd think not, right? But for decades, the answer was, surprisingly, a resounding yes. Okay, so check this out. This is the original experiment from way back in 1992. One group of people had to choose between 2 cameras, camera A and camera B. A second group saw those exact same 2 cameras, but with a third, much pricier option, camera C, thrown into the mix. And this is where it gets really interesting. This shows what's called the compromise effect. When that super expensive camera C was added, almost nobody bought it. I mean, it was way too expensive. But suddenly, sales of camera B shot way up. Why? Because it didn't seem like the expensive option anymore. It became the safe, middle-of-the-road compromise. Just changing the context changed the decision. Now, this little marketing trick worked for decades. It's famously why Williams-Sonoma added a more expensive bread maker to their catalog. Not to sell it, but to boost sales of their original one. But recently, researchers ran this exact same test again, with one crucial, game-changing difference. They let the participants first browse a site like Amazon, with all of its reviews and star ratings and data. And the results? It was stunning. The compromise effect completely vanished.
As you can see on the graph, adding that expensive third camera had basically no impact on people's choice. They already knew the absolute value of camera B from the reviews, so the old marketing trick just didn't work anymore.
So this isn't just about cameras or bread makers. We are all, more and more, living on a new world that the researchers have playfully called Planet Absolute. Just think of it like this for a second. Imagine that before you bought anything, you could press a magic button and know exactly what your experience with that product was going to be like. Economists actually have a name for this. They call it perfect information. Now, on this Planet Absolute, all the old shortcuts we used to rely on to guess a product's quality, well, they'd become totally obsolete. You wouldn't need a famous brand name to tell you something is good. You wouldn't need a salesperson's pitch. You wouldn't even need your own past experience. You just press the button and know.
Of course, we don't have a literal magic button, but the internet has given us the next best thing. Online reviews, expert sites, YouTube tutorials, social media. These are all little pieces of that magic button, helping us get closer and closer to a product's true, absolute value before we ever spend a single $1. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Fake reviews, paid influencers. I mean, can we really trust all this stuff? And that is a totally valid concern, one that researchers have definitely looked into. And what the data shows is pretty clear. Despite all the problems, our trust in online information is actually growing. A big Nielsen study found that 70% of us trusts online reviews, and that number is climbing fast. It seems like we've collectively decided that even imperfect information from thousands of our peers is better than a perfectly polished pitch from a single marketer. And it's not passive either. We're actively putting in the work. Research done for Google found the average shopper now checks more than 10 sources before making a purchase. That's nearly double from just the year before. We are all becoming detectives trying to find that absolute value. Okay, so let's tie this all together. Let's go back to our original mystery. How does this new world of absolute value explain the mind-blowing success of an underdog like ASUS?
Well, ASUS won because they just instinctively understood these new rules. They thought the EEPC was for kids and first-time users, but online reviews from tech bloggers reached the real market, business travelers who wanted a cheap, light, second laptop. Old-school market research would have totally missed this because it would have been asking the wrong people. And the product didn't spread slowly from early adopters to the masses. The online buzz made it a hit with everyone all at once.
So here's the bottom line, the really crucial point. When anyone can easily and quickly find out the true quality of a product, a big, famous brand name just doesn't carry the same weight it used to. It's no longer the main signal for quality. A great product can now speak for itself, and its voice is amplified by thousands of users all over the internet. And this all leaves us with a really fascinating and kind of huge question for the future. As we get closer and closer to that magic button of perfect information, where products' real, absolute quality is transparent for everyone to see, what's the role of a brand anymore? What does it even mean to be a Nike or a Sony or a Ford in a world of absolute value?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about something really interesting. Why all those classic marketing tricks, the ones that used to work on us so easily, might actually be losing their power.
You ever get home from the store, look at something you bought and just think, why did I buy that? Well, for decades, researchers had a pretty simple answer for you. You were tricked. And they had proof. I mean, for something like 40 years, countless lab studies showed exactly this. They proved that with just a tiny little tweak in how something's presented, our choices could be totally flipped on their head.
But what if that's not the case anymore? What if all those old tricks are just failing? That's what we're digging into today. This idea that the crazy, noisy world of the internet might actually be making us, well, more rational. Kind of weird, right?
Okay, so before we go any further, let's get on the same page. What do these researchers even mean when they say irrational? Let's break it down.
Right? So, in this context, irrationality isn't about, believing in aliens or something. It's about being inconsistent. It's like you pick product A over product B, but then somebody changes one tiny irrelevant thing about the presentation, and suddenly you're picking B over A. That's the kind of thing we're talking about.
And these kinds of influences, which, let's be honest, we've probably all fallen for at some point, they usually fall into three main categories.
All right, so let's put these classic tricks to the test.
how do they actually hold up in the messy, complicated real world of today? And we're going to start with probably the most famous one of all, framing effects.
So here's the classic example. In a lab, you give people ground beef. One package says 90% lean. The other says 10% fat. It's the exact same beef. But guess what? People consistently rated the 90% lean beef as tasting better. The positive frame literally made it taste different to them. Wild, right?
But see, that's in a quiet lab. In the real world, frames don't just exist in a vacuum. They get challenged. Think about this. A company called its product lean, finely textured beef. Sounds pretty good, right? Then a critic comes along and calls it pink slime. Yeah, guess which name stuck? That one negative frame completely destroyed the company's positive one.
Okay, next up, let's talk about how the context of our choices can be messed with. And this paper shredder example, oh, it is an absolute masterclass in this stuff.
So, imagine this. You've got two choices for a paper shredder. One is $20, the other is $50, and a bit better. Then, the marketers throw in a third option, a decoy. It's way more expensive, say $95, but it's only slightly better than the $50 one. Suddenly, that $50 option looks like an amazing deal, right? And that's what happens. More people pick it. That's the decoy effect in action.
But here's the killer twist. When they ran that exact same experiment, but in a setup that looked like, say, Amazon, with dozens of different shredders to choose from, the decoy effect, it completely disappeared. Gone. It just didn't work. All right, last category, task effects. This is where marketers try to influence us by basically making it hard to compare things side by side. But today, well, our phones are fighting back.
Think about it. In the old days, you're in a store. There's a fancy display for a super expensive toaster. It looks great, but comparing it to other options is a pain. You just kind of go with it. But now, you just pull out your phone, scan the barcode, and bam! Instantly, you see 10 cheaper alternatives, all with better reviews. The whole game has changed.
So what's going on here? Why are all these tried and true tricks suddenly failing? The answer is actually pretty simple, and it all comes down to one word: noise. You see, all those psychological tricks work best in a quiet, controlled environment, like a lab. But the modern world, especially online, is anything but quiet. It is loud. It is full of noise. And by that, we mean all the stuff the marketer can't control. We're talking user reviews, price comparison sites, social media chatter, you name it.
The contrast is just stark. Trying to influence someone in a quiet lab, it's relatively easy. But trying to influence that same person when they're online, the source material had this perfect analogy for it. It's like trying to hypnotize someone while they're riding a motorcycle at 100 miles an hour. It's just not going to work.
And you see this play out in the real world, too. There was this fascinating study on speed dating. Before the event, in a quiet survey, women said that physical attractiveness wasn't really a top factor for them. But then, during the actual event, this fast-paced, noisy, real-world situation with 20 dates back-to-back, attractiveness suddenly became just as important for them as it was for the men. The noise changed the behavior.
Okay, but there's a huge caveat here. A really important exception to this whole idea. This debiasing effective noise, the thing that makes us more rational, it only works if one key ingredient is present. For all this noise to actually work its magic, we have to be exposed to different kinds of information, different perspectives. It's not just about more noise, it's about diverse noise.
So if you're in an environment with lots of different info, you check different news sites, you see ads from competing brands, you read user reviews, you're pretty well protected. But if you're in an echo chamber, or like a cult-like brand community, where everyone is seeing and saying the exact same thing, well, in that case, all those classic irrationality tricks still work perfectly.
So let's wrap this up. What's the big takeaway from all of this for us, as regular people trying to make good choices?
Does this mean we've all just gotten smarter? Has the internet literally evolved our brains to be more logical and rational?
The answer is probably not. Our brains are pretty much the same old brains they've always been. The real difference isn't us, it's our tools. The source for this puts it in such a great way. It's not that we're smarter, it's the technology has given the once bendable Gumby consumer a spine. All our tools, search engines, review sites, price checkers, they've given us a backbone. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about.
As our tools keep getting better and better, could the entire art of persuasion eventually become obsolete?
Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, think about the last time you bought something online. Did you feel totally overwhelmed by all the choices? Today, we're going to dig into how the digital age hasn't just given us more options, it's actually fundamentally rewired the way we make decisions about, well, pretty much everything. So you might think this quote is some recent hot take on the internet, right? But nope. It's actually from a scholar way back in 1545, and he was complaining about the printing press. It's just a perfect reminder that this fear of information overload, well, it's not new at all. We've been grappling with it for centuries. Right, so we've all heard the theory. Endless options online lead to decision paralysis, the idea that we just get stuck. But is that really what's happening when you're scrolling for a new phone or even just a new pair of headphones? Let's take a closer look. It turns out that popular story about choice overload, it might just be a myth. The reality for most of us is actually, believe it or not, the complete opposite. Well, yeah, some people definitely feel that information anxiety. Most of us have, well, we've evolved. We've become expert filters, you know? We use all these new digital tools to sift through the chaos and pinpoint exactly what we're looking for. I mean, think about your own online shopping habits. When you're looking for a camera on Amazon, you don't scroll through every single option, do you? Of course not. You instantly filter by best rated or most popular. Or say on a beauty site, you might filter reviews to see only what people with your exact skin type are saying. We take this giant ocean of choice and turn it into a perfectly curated list in a matter of seconds. And this newfound skill for managing all this information, it's created some really interesting new consumer behaviors. So let's look at the first one, which completely flips the old school idea of shopping on its head. This brings us to a behavior called couch tracking. And honestly, think of it like being a sports fan, but for products. Millions of us follow the latest phones or cars or video games. We keep up with all the rumors and the new features, all without any immediate plan to actually buy anything. This quote from an actual user just says it all, doesn't it? It means our preferences are getting locked in long before we're officially in the market for something. By the time a couch tracker's old tablet finally gives up, they probably already know exactly which one they're getting next. Okay, let's move on to the second big pattern we're seeing. This constant information gathering isn't just changing what we know, it's also changing how fast we decide. You know, for decades, the model for a purchase was this thing called the marketing funnel. First, you become aware of a product, then you'd consider it for a while, and then finally, maybe, you'd buy it. It was this slow, predictable journey. But today, that funnel is just collapsing. Because we're now so empowered to find information for ourselves, we feel this compulsion to act on it immediately. So all those stages, awareness, consideration, purchase, they can now happen in a single moment. You can discover a new camera, see it's a bestseller, scan the top reviews, and click buy, all in the span of like a few minutes. The third new pattern is all about the kind of information we trust now. It's a fundamental shift from decisions of the heart to decisions of the head. Essentially, our information diet has a lot less marketing sugar in it now. We've really shifted away from the emotional pull of old TV ads, that whole preserve your precious memories kind of vibe, and we've moved towards the cold, hard facts of user reviews, spec sheets, and performance scores. So what happens when you combine all these new behaviors together? You know, the couch tracking, the faster verdicts, and this focus on facts. You get the rise of a whole new type of person, the super informed consumer. And the perfect case study for this is the tech journalist Peter Rojas. As the founder of massive tech sites like Gizmodo and Engadget, he didn't just understand these new consumer behaviors, he built entire media empires to cater to them. So what does the extreme end of this spectrum look like? Well, at one point, Rojas personally owned 76 different gadgets. 76! That's not just being a tech fan, that's living and breathing the data, constantly comparing and evaluating. His later site, gdgt.com, was basically a blueprint for this new consumer world. It had an I want it button to let people do their couch tracking. It had a special GDGT score to deliver a fast verdict, and the entire platform was built around rational, data-driven information, not emotional marketing. It's a perfect fit. Now, most of us probably don't own 76 gadgets, but that's not really the point. the key takeaway here is that we're all on the same path. The tools and behaviors that were once just for the super geeks, well, they're becoming completely mainstream. So the big takeaway here is this. We aren't paralyzed by information. We are being empowered by it. We're all developing new skills and using new tools to make better, faster, and more rational decisions, which leads us to our final question for you to think about. How have these new patterns changed the way you make choices? Okay, so think about the last thing you bought online. You checked the reviews, right? Of course you did. We all do. But as you were scrolling, did you ever get that little voice in your head asking, are these for real? Well, today we are going to dive deep into that exact question and find out the truth about online reviews. This is really the billion-dollar question of our digital age, isn't it? We put our faith in total strangers to help us pick everything from a new restaurant to a life-changing vacation. But can you really, truly trust the crowd? Well, what might surprise you is that, despite all the scams and horror stories, the answer seems to be a resounding yes. But okay, first things first, let's not pretend there isn't a problem, 'cause there is. And some of the stories out there are just wild. They seem to prove that our worst fears about fake reviews are totally justified. Meet Jeremy Trevathan. He's a top dog at a major publishing house. He hopped on Amazon under the fake name Gary O'Reilly and dropped a glowing 5-star review for a book that his own company published. He called it funny and moving. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's a textbook case of someone trying to rig the game from the very top. Now, look at this number, $28,000. That's how much a guy named Todd Jason Rutherford was making every month. And what was his business? Selling fake Amazon reviews. For just under $1,000, you could get a package of 50. This wasn't some little side hustle. It was a full-blown industry built on lies. And get this, it's not just individuals. Even the institutions we're supposed to trust can get played. In a pretty insane publicity stunt, some bloggers got the Better Business Bureau to give an A- rating to a fake business they set up for Hamas. Yeah, you heard me right. All it took was a credit card and a $425 fee. It just goes to show you how vulnerable even the supposed gatekeepers can be. So things are looking pretty bad, right? It sounds like the whole system is broken. But this is where our story takes a really interesting turn. The source for this explainer sees all these problems, but then they hit us with a massive curveball. They say that even with all this, they are bullish about the future of reviews, that this whole trend is basically inevitable. The big question is, how? Why? So, why is the system so much tougher than it looks? Well, it really boils down to the simple but incredibly powerful math of a crowd. Here's the secret sauce. It's all about scale. Writing one single fake review? Super easy. Anyone can do it. But actually changing a product's overall rating once tons of people have weighed in, that's a whole different ballgame. It becomes almost impossibly difficult. It's like it's easy to poison a glass of water, but it's really, really hard to poison an entire lake. Let's circle back to our publisher friend, Jeremy Trevathan. That one fake 5-star review he wrote, it was just a tiny drop in a huge bucket. It got completely drowned out by 50 other real reviews, including 25 one-star bombs that called the book a disaster. The final result? A pretty miserable 2.5-star average. His little scheme was totally useless. It's the perfect example of the crowd just overpowering one bad actor. And here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't just about companies trying to be ethical. Nope. There's a huge economic incentive, a really powerful reason for these review sites to keep things on the level. Their whole business depends on it. Just look at this downward spiral. It's simple, and it's brutal. If a site like Yelp or TripAdvisor gets flooded with fakes, we, the users, lose trust. And what happens then? We stop going to the site. And when the users disappear, so does the advertising money. For these companies, being believable isn't just a nice to have. It's literally the lifeblood of their business. You know what? The system doesn't just sit there and take it. It actually fights back. It's kind of like it has its own immune system, with all these built-in checks and balances that are designed to fight off manipulation. I mean, think about it. Not all review sites are created equal, right? You've got your open posting sites like TripAdvisor or Yelp, where pretty much anyone can leave a review. That makes them more vulnerable. But then you have sites with verified purchases like Expedia or Angie's List, where you have to prove you were actually a customer. That one simple step makes it so much harder to post fakes. And hey, remember that crazy Hamas story? It sounded like a massive failure, right? But in a weird way, it actually proves the system works. The whole point of the stunt was to expose a weakness, and man, did it work. The story blew up, ABC's 2020 covered it, and that public outrage forced the BBB to clean up its act. It's like journalism and public opinion are the antibodies that rush in to fight the infection. So, okay, how many fake reviews are really out there? There's this big estimate from Gartner that says it could be as high as 10 to 15% of all reviews. Yikes. But then you look at a company like Bizarre Voice, which manages reviews for huge retailers and actively fights the stuff. And what do they find? Only about 1% of the reviews they get are actually fake. That's a huge difference. The battle is on, and in a lot of places, the good guys are winning. And let's be real. You don't just rely on one thing, do you? None of us do. We have this whole information toolkit we use. We check out what the experts say, we ask our friends, we might throw a question out on social media. We even have government watchdogs like the FTC looking out for fraud. A single fake review doesn't just have to fool you. It has to get past your entire personal network. So what does all this mean? Where are we headed? Well, the big takeaway here is that we're in the middle of a massive and probably irreversible shift in who holds the power. Get this. After all the scandals and all the skepticism, a massive study by Nielsen found that 70% of people around the world trust online consumer reviews. That makes it the second most trusted source of information on the planet. The only thing we trust more? A recommendation from someone we actually know. The system might be messy, but we believe in it. And this quote from Peter Rojas, the guy who founded Engadget and Gizmodo, just nails it. It's not some conspiracy. It's just that the products tend to get the reviews they deserve. That's it, right there. You get enough real people talking, and eventually the truth just comes out. The crowd, with all its messiness, usually gets it right. And that leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. We've gone from a world where companies told us what was good to a world where we tell each other what's good. The power has completely flipped. So the real question isn't just about whether we can trust reviews, it's about what happens next in a world where you, the consumer, are now the ultimate source of truth. So let's dive into a story about how the entire idea of a brand has been completely turned on its head. For the longest time, we relied on big, famous names to tell us what was good. But then a quiet revolution started, led by people you've never heard of in places you would never expect. It all kicked off with this. A pretty simple review on Yelp for a local Italian joint called Machiavelli, written by a user named Brenna F. Now, Brenna wasn't some professional food critic. Nope. She was just a regular person with an opinion, but her small act of sharing that thought online, well, it was the start of something way, way bigger. I mean, look at this review. It's personal, it's a little funny, and at the time, it probably seemed totally insignificant. Not with a first date. That's the kind of wonderfully specific human detail you never ever get from a slick corporate ad. And that right there was the first pebble that started an avalanche, one that would go on to disrupt entire billion-dollar industries. To really get why this one little review mattered so much, we have to take a quick trip back in time to an era when brands were pretty much our only compass. Think about it. Before the internet, how did you really know if a camera or a car was any good? It was tough to figure out, so we leaned on the big, familiar names to guide us. A well-known brand was basically a promise that you knew what you were getting. It was a signal of consistency. And here's where it gets really interesting. A powerful enough brand could actually carry a product that honestly wasn't all that great. That trusted name acted like a shield, protecting a flawed product from failing, at least for a little while. A perfect example is the Kodak disc camera. The promise was awesome, and it was backed by one of the most trusted brands on the planet. And man, did it sell. Over 8 million of these things in the first year alone. But there was a tiny problem. The one thing a camera is supposed to do well, take good pictures, it did pretty poorly. The photos were just grainy. You can just imagine the reviews today, right? 1 star, great camera if you love blurry photos. It would get torn apart online in minutes. Back then, word of mouth moved at a snail's pace. Today, it moves at the speed of light, and a flaw like that would be exposed almost instantly. So how did we get from one person's opinion, like Brenna Faye's, to a collective force that could actually challenge these massive established brands? Well, Brenna's review wasn't alone for long. Pretty soon, Megan D chimed in with her 4-star take. Then Rachel B dropped by to recommend the Caesar salad. Slowly but surely, this little trickle of reviews grew into this incredibly reliable, crowdsourced picture of what you could really expect for matcha the good, the bad, and yeah, the delicious spinach ravioli. And this right here is the absolute core of the shift. Before this, the main advantage of a big chain restaurant wasn't that the food was amazing. It was that you knew exactly what you were going to get. It was predictable. All of a sudden, Yelp gave that exact same superpower to the little guy.
Okay, so this isn't just a collection of nice stories about good pasta. There's some serious data that proves this whole shift has a real, measurable financial impact on businesses.
So a Harvard researcher, Michael Luca, wanted to find out if there was a direct link between what people were writing on Yelp and a restaurant's actual bottom line. He managed to get his hands on the real revenue data for every restaurant in Seattle and started digging in. And what he found was this super clever quirk in Yelp's system. See, Yelp doesn't show you the exact average score, it rounds it. So a restaurant with a 3.24 average is, for all intents and purposes, the same quality as one with a 3.25. But to the customer, they look totally different. That tiny, almost meaningless 100th of a point difference in the real score led to a huge difference in what we all see. The 3.24 gets rounded down to a flat 3 stars, but that 3.25, it gets rounded up to 3.5 stars. And here's the kicker. For every single extra star a restaurant showed on Yelp, Luca discovered it was connected to about a 5% increase in revenue. That little half star, born from a simple rounding quirk, was worth real, actual money. And it gets even more telling when you look at the market over time. As Yelp got more and more popular in Seattle, independent places like Machiavelli saw their revenues go up. Meanwhile, the big chains, they actually saw their share of the pie start to shrink. The crowd was literally leveling the playing field. Now, this new world of information didn't just shake up the restaurant scene. It created a much more volatile, much more competitive landscape for pretty much everyone, rattling industries that had been rock solid for decades. I mean, just think about some of the brands that once felt absolutely invincible. MySpace, AOL, Nokia, these guys were giants. But in a world where a better product can have its quality proven and shared instantly, no legacy, no reputation is safe. And it wasn't just the brand names that lost their magic. Those other old shortcuts we used for quality started to fall apart too. The old saying, you get what you pay for, that doesn't really hold up when there's a cheaper product with thousands of 5-star reviews. And being made in Italy doesn't mean much if 100 people are online saying your espresso machine leaks all over the counter. But look, this disruption isn't just about things falling apart. It also creates a massive opportunity for any newcomer who has a genuinely high-quality product. This exact thing plays out millions of times a day now. A company like Europro can put its Shark vacuum right next to a legendary brand and actually win the sale. Why? Because right there in your hand, your smartphone can give you more trustworthy information about quality than a century of advertising ever could. And maybe the single best story to illustrate this whole new world comes from the guy who literally wrote the book on branding, a professor and author named David Aker. People call him the father of brand equity. You know, the whole idea that a brand name itself has real financial value. So when his wife's computer died, his brain immediately jumped to the huge brands he knew, like Dell and HP. But after a quick chat with his local computer guru and a call to his son-in-law, he blew past them all and bought an Asus, a brand he'd never even heard of. He bought it based entirely on the advice of experts he trusted. I mean, that is just such a profound shift. When the world's leading expert on branding completely ignores the brand and buys a no-name computer because of reviews and expert advice, you know something fundamental has changed. Quality, as judged and proven by the crowd, is the new brand. So, have you ever wondered why a genius creator, someone who's just absolutely crushing it, suddenly releases a total flop? It's not just a fluke. Turns out the rules for success have been completely rewritten. And your past triumphs? Well, they're worth a whole lot less than you might think. So let's kick things off with a bit of a puzzle. How did the mind behind Google Maps, one of the most successful apps of all time, launch a new product with Google's full support that just completely face-planted? The answer tells us a lot about a huge shift in how we value, well, pretty much everything. Okay, so this is Lars Rasmussen. After co-creating Google Maps, the guy was a rock star innovator. So when he got on stage to announce his next big thing, Google Wave, expectations were through the roof. I mean, he had the track record, the talent, the full might of Google behind him. It really seemed like a guaranteed home run.
But it wasn't, not even close. And that's because the game has fundamentally changed. We've gone from a world where we relied on past experience, a brand's reputation, to a new reality where we make a brutal, instant assessment of a product's absolute current value.
So how does this actually play out in the real world? Let's dig into exactly why that past glory just isn't enough to carry you across the finish line anymore. Just think about it for a second. Back in the day, when getting good information was tough, this made total sense. If you had a Sony Walkman and you loved it, you just kind of assumed their CD players would be great too. And hey, if that was good, maybe their laptops were a safe bet. A brand's history was a really useful shortcut. But here's the thing. Today, we just don't need those shortcuts. And this quote, it absolutely nails the core idea. We have such easy access to information now that we can judge every single product on its own merits right here, right now.
So, what does this new world of instant, accurate info actually look like?
Well, the source material has a pretty cool name for it.
Welcome to Planet Absolute. And no, this isn't some sci-fi fantasy. It's increasingly the world we all live in. It's a place where you can tap a button on your phone and know the real, true value of pretty much any product or service before you ever spend a dime. So, on the old planet, this tagline would be incredibly powerful. You loved Guy Ritchie's movie Snatch, right? So this phrase alone would probably be enough to get you into the theater for his next film. You're trusting his past success. But on Planet Absolute, you just whip out your phone and you see this. The Rotten Tomatoes score for his other movie, Swept Away, 5 out of 100. Ouch. In a split second, your decision is made, and his past hit means absolutely nothing.
And that's the whole point. A single, powerful piece of data, like a terrible review score, can completely erase the goodwill and trust that was built up over an entire career. Past performance is no longer a guarantee of, well, anything.
This brings us to a concept that marketers have held sacred for decades, but one that's basically becoming a myth in this age of absolute value: customer loyalty. I love this quote because it's so true. The new consumer mindset is basically an open marriage. We're happy to stick with the brand that treats us well, but we're always looking. And if something better comes along, we're gone. And we don't feel too bad about it either. And hey, the numbers totally back this up. A big study of mobile subscribers found that only about 29% really considered themselves loyalists. A whopping 71% said, yeah, I'd switch for better service, cooler tech, or just a better deal. We've seen this happen over and over. Remember the CrackBerry? Millions of people were completely addicted, but they dropped BlackBerry in a heartbeat when the iPhone showed up. And in the travel world, review sites have just demolished brand loyalty. Only 8% of travelers stick with the same hotel chain anymore. Now, this shift has some massive implications for businesses. You know that old model of calculating a customer's lifetime value? It's becoming pretty much theoretical. You can't build a business plan on the loyalty of customers who have one foot out the door. But hang on, this isn't all doom and gloom. This new era isn't just about risk and disappearing loyalty. It's also about a huge new opportunity for anyone who's ready to compete based on their current value. Think about it. If past success doesn't protect you from failure, then the flip side has to be true too. Past failure doesn't have to define you forever. In a world that judges you on what you're doing right now, even companies with a terrible reputation can earn their way back. And the story of Hyundai is the perfect example of this. Their first car in the US was literally a punchline. But they became completely obsessed with quality. By 2004, a major J.D. Power study ranked them higher than every single American and European brand. And because that info was all over the internet, people gave them a second chance. Now they're an industry leader. And here it is, the key opportunity. If your product today is genuinely better, your competitors' customers are easier to win over than ever before. Their so-called loyalty is totally up for grabs every single time they make a purchase. Which brings us right back to Google Wave. Its failure is the ultimate proof. Even for the geniuses who made Google Maps, their past brilliance couldn't save a product that people just found confusing. Users judged Wave on its own merits, and it simply failed the test. So the ultimate takeaway here is that success today is incredibly fleeting. It has to be earned over and over again. The market has no memory. Every single day, your product has to prove its worth from scratch. So I'll leave you with this final thought, for your own work or just for the brands you use. In this age of absolute value, there is really nowhere to hide. The only question that matters is what you're offering right now truly good enough?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about something pretty radical. What if everything we thought we knew about how new ideas spread is, well, just wrong? We're going to see how today's hyper-connected world has totally ripped up the old playbook, and why those classic marketing strategies, they might be doing more harm than good. I know. How on earth does a 1930s Iowa farm explain the internet? It sounds a little crazy, right? But trust me, it all starts right there, on a patch of land called Pinehurst Farm. This was home to a family who, and they had no idea at the time, would literally change how we think about technology for generations.
So let's paint a picture. It's the 1930s. For the Rogers family out on Pinehurst Farm, getting new information was, well, it was slow. There's no internet, no 24-hour news cycle, new ideas came from just a few places, and information pretty much moved at the speed of a weekly drive to the nearest town. And when information is that hard to come by, every single decision is a huge gamble. I mean, think about it. A new type of seed, a different kind of tractor. You couldn't just Google the reviews. Uncertainty was basically the air you breathed. Your best bet was to hope your neighbor tried it first and it didn't bankrupt him.
And out of this world of slow, cautious learning came their son, Everett M. Rogers. He took these childhood memories and turned them into this massive theory, a theory so powerful it would become the Bible for marketers and sociologists for the next 50 years.
And Rogers' theory? Well, it wasn't just some dusty academic paper. It was a practical roadmap. It gave everyone a clear, predictable path for how new things catch on. And the whole thing started by putting every single one of us into one of 5 buckets. This basically set up a domino effect. You see, an idea had to start with the adventurous innovators. Then it had to slowly, carefully win over the early adopters, the opinion leaders. Only then could it even dream of reaching the rest of us. It was a slow, step-by-step march. But here's the catch. This whole process had a huge, gaping hole in it, a failure point. Geoffrey Moore famously called it the chasm. It's this massive communication gap between the visionaries who love new tech and the practical folks in the mainstream. And if your new idea fell into that chasm, game over. It was dead on arrival.
Okay, but here's the thing. That whole world of Pinehurst Farm, the slow, uncertain, step-by-step world, it's gone. Completely. We now live in an age of instant, total information. And this new reality didn't just bend the old rules, it shattered them. Just think about the difference for a second. Back in the day, figuring out if a piece of software was any good could take months of asking around and just guessing. Now, you check the App Store, you glance at the star rating, scan a few reviews, and in literally minutes, the uncertainty is gone. The truth about a product, whether it's good or bad, is out there for everyone to see, almost instantly.
So what's the engine behind all this change? Well, it's a really cool idea from sociology called the strength of weak ties. Here's the gist. The internet connects you to way more than just your best friends. It connects you to thousands of acquaintances. And it's those people, your weak ties, who bring you brand new information that your close friends, who all kind of know the same stuff you do, just can't.
And this leads us to a really, really important question. If you're a pragmatist, one of those early majority folks, and you can instantly see what thousands of other pragmatists think about a product, well, is there even a chasm to cross anymore? Does that communication gap even exist? For years, tech companies built these super complex strategies for that old world. There was one called the bowling alley. The whole idea was you'd target one tiny niche market, knock it down like the first pin, and hope it would then knock over the next one, and so on. It was all built on the assumption that information spread slowly, one group at a time. And you can see this play out perfectly with the tablet computer. Check this out. In 2002, Microsoft rolls out its tablet PC. They use the old bowling alley playbook, targeting doctors, lawyers, very specific niches. And it kind of flopped. Then 8 years later, Apple launches the iPad. Their strategy? Just put it out there for everyone. Let people figure out what it's for. And boom, it was a monster hit, right out of the gate across every demographic imaginable. Let's go back to Pinehurst Farm for a second. Remember how we said everything was about what you could see?
That's what Rogers called observability, and it was everything. You bought the new tractor because you could lean on the fence and literally watch your neighbor use it and see that it worked. For an idea to take hold, it had to be right there in front of your eyes. But today, the internet makes everything observable to everyone, all at once. That just completely changes the equation. It's no longer about who sees it first. The number one thing that matters now is what Rogers called relative advantage. It's a simple question. Is your product actually, truly, demonstrably better than everything else out there?
And this is where our story comes completely full circle. We started on an Iowa farm with Everett Rogers, and now we're going to talk about another guy from Iowa, Ben Silberman. He grew up not too far from there and would go on to build a company that basically proved all these new rules were true.
So when Pinterest launched, the Silicon Valley innovators, the supposed gatekeepers, pretty much ignored it. They gave it a collective yawn. But instead of trying to win them over, Pinterest just went around them. It found its home with crafters, bloggers, and regular people in the Midwest. It completely sidestepped that old, predictable adoption curve and just exploded.
And here's the kicker. Silberman, the founder, said it himself. He knew that the old way, this idea that you have to be gated through Silicon Valley, that you have to follow this rigid path, it just wasn't relevant anymore. The old gates have been kicked down.
So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that the walls between all those adopter groups, the innovators, the skeptics, the pragmatists, they've basically crumbled to dust. Today, your product can be discovered by anyone, anywhere, all at the same time, right from day one. And that leaves us with one last really big question, especially if you're out there building something new. If the true quality of your product is going to be revealed to everyone instantly, is designing for a tiny elite group of innovators the right move? Or is that a losing strategy before you've even begun? You know, if you ever took a Marketing 101 class, you probably learned that the whole game is about crafting the perfect message to win a tiny spot in the consumer's mind. But what if all of that is just wrong now? Today, we're going to dig into why those classic rules are broken and what's taken their place in a world where we have all the information we could ever want, right at our fingertips. And it all kind of starts with this really weird question from Blink-182's drummer Travis Barker in a TV commercial way back in 2011. He and his band are, for some reason, gardening, and then, boom, they just start glowing blue. A very legitimate question, I think.
So, this ad was for a new HTC phone. A fan has to explain to the band that they're glowing because her phone has this special Facebook share button that lights up whenever something share-worthy is happening. This whole thing was a huge, expensive bet on a very old marketing idea, and man, did it backfire spectacularly.
Okay, so to get why this whole thing fell flat, we've got to go back and look at the strategy behind it. It's a classic concept called positioning, which, for decades, was the absolute bedrock of all advertising.
See, positioning isn't really about what a product is, it's about what you think it is. The whole game was to find a little empty space in the consumer's brain and plant your flag there. You wanted your product to be the one and only thing they thought of for a single powerful idea.
And listen, for a long, long time, this worked like a charm. When you thought safety, you thought Volvo. Speed had to be Ferrari. Reliability, Toyota, for sure. You could even own being number 2. Avis built its entire brand on "We Try Harder." These companies literally owned a word in our brains. And that brings us right back to our glowing blue rock band. HTC's strategy was crystal clear. They wanted to own the word Facebook. They thought millions of young people would see this phone and think, that's the Facebook phone, an absolutely essential part of their social lives. But that's not what happened. Yeah, the failure of the Facebook phone is the perfect snapshot of the exact moment this old playbook just stopped working. The world had completely changed, but it seems like marketing hadn't quite gotten the memo yet. This phone was a massive flop. I mean, critics and regular people immediately started calling it the failbook phone. So what went so wrong? Why didn't this textbook, by-the-book positioning strategy work at all?
Well, the problem was actually pretty simple. The position wasn't real. The whole unique angle, this dedicated Facebook button, it wasn't a real advantage. In a world of smartphones and instant reviews, everybody already knew you could easily share to Facebook from any phone. The marketing message was just a gimmick, and people saw right through it.
And look, this wasn't just a one-off mistake. HTC actually doubled down on the exact same strategy. They launched another phone, the Resound,
with Beats Audio and threw a huge ad campaign behind it, trying to position it as the ultimate sound phone for music lovers.
But here's where you see the huge disconnect. The marketers wanted everyone to focus on this one thing, the amazing sound. But consumers, who were armed with endless online reviews and YouTube videos, were asking about everything else. They were like, okay, but how's the camera? What about the screen? The battery life? They were comparing the entire product.
The reviewers just didn't play along. They gave just as much weight to the camera, the display, and the battery. And in those areas, the HTC resound was, well, it was just average. The marketer's carefully crafted message was totally irrelevant when faced with the product's actual overall value, a value anyone could check for themselves in about 30 seconds.
So all of this points to this huge fundamental shift in who's really in control. If marketers can't just tell us how to see a product anymore, who can? Well, we can. This is what we call the rise of organic segmentation.
Organic segmentation is basically what happens when people, real users, decide for themselves who a product is for. And that's a huge deal for marketers. It means they're not drawing the map anymore. They're basically just passengers. It forces them to stop dictating a message and start listening to how real people are actually using and defining their products.
The perfect example of this in action is the Nintendo Wii. Now, Nintendo's main target for video games has pretty much always been kids and young adults, and they launched the Wii thinking it would be the same old story. But then, something totally unexpected happened. A completely new group of people fell in love with the Wii, a group that was completely off the marketing department's radar. Any guesses who it was? Believe it or not, the elderly. Seniors all across the country discovered Wii Sports, and all of a sudden, Wii bowling leagues were popping up in retirement communities everywhere. Now, the brilliant part is what Nintendo did next. They didn't ignore it or fight it. They leaned right in, embraced this new organic audience, and even started promoting the Wii to members of the AARP. So, the lesson here is incredibly clear. The power has shifted. Companies can have a plan, sure, but at the end of the day, it's the users who decide who a product is really for. The market segments now grow from the ground up.
Okay, so if positioning is pointless and users are now in control, what's left? This brings us to our final and honestly most important point, the death of empty persuasion and the rise of just simple, undeniable merit.
There's this famous scene in the Woody Allen movie Annie Hall. They're in a movie line, and there's this guy just pontificating, talking loudly, trying to show off to his date by completely misinterpreting the work of the media theorist Marshall McLuhan.
So Woody Allen's character calls him out on it, but the man just doubles down. He uses a classic persuasion trick, an appeal to authority. He says, "I happen to teach a class at Columbia, so I think my insights have a great deal of validity." That's old school marketing in a nutshell, right? Don't worry about the facts, just trust me, the source. But what happens next is what makes this scene so perfect. Woody Allen just walks off screen for a second and brings back the ultimate reliable source. The actual, real Marshall McLuhan. He looks the man dead in the eye and just says, "You know nothing of my work." And in that one instant, all the posturing, all the persuasion, all the appeals to authority, it all just evaporates. The truth, delivered by an undeniable source, wins.
And that is the world we all live in now. Every single consumer has their own Marshall McLuhan right in their pocket. Why would you ever listen to a slick commercial's claims about a Facebook button when you can instantly pull up dozens of expert reviews, thousands of user ratings, and all the hard data you want? Empty persuasion just crumbles in the face of truth you can access yourself.
So this leaves us with one final, crucial takeaway. Marketing isn't about crafting the perfect message anymore. At the end of the day, what you say matters far, far less than what you actually do. In a world of infinite information, the best marketing isn't a clever message, it's just building something that's actually worth talking about.
You know, we all think we know what makes our customers tick. But what if I told you that the marketing playbook most of us are using is just wrong? Today, we're going to dig into what really drives a purchase decision right now. Okay, so get this. This was a real question that Bounty Paper Towels posted on their Facebook page. You know, they're trying to do that whole join the conversation thing that's so popular. And yeah, on the surface, it's kind of harmless, maybe even a little cute, but it actually points to a way bigger issue that a lot of marketers are facing. Here's the thing, and it's so important. This kind of stuff has basically zero impact on whether you or I are going to buy Bounty Paper Towels. It's a perfect example of jumping on a trend without asking the most important question, does this actually fit how people decide to buy my product? Right. So that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you know the right way to connect with your customers? Well, the answer isn't just chasing the next big trend. What we really need is a framework, a tool, to figure out what's actually going on in your customer's head. And lucky for us, we've got one. Let's dive into it. We can map out pretty much any purchase decision using this really simple but powerful model called the influence mix. It breaks down every single decision into just 3 key sources of influence. We're talking P, O, and M. So, first up, we've got P, and that stands for prior beliefs. This is all the stuff your customer already has rattling around in their head. Their past experiences, their habits, what they think they like. And it's funny, we all like to believe our preferences are set in stone, right? But the truth is, for most things, our P is actually kind of flimsy and surprisingly easy to change. Okay, next up is O for others, and wow, this one is huge. We're talking friends, family, Amazon reviews, expert blogs, YouTube unboxings, comparison websites, the whole shebang. But the key thing here, the absolute secret sauce, is trust. People trust O so much because it feels like you're getting the inside scoop, the real story that the company doesn't want you to hear. And last but not least, M for marketers. Yep, that's us. The ads, the fancy packaging, the corporate website. The thing is, customers see us as, well, the usual suspect. They know we have an agenda, right? We're trying to sell something. So sure, they'll look at M for basic info like price or where to buy it, but to figure out if it's actually any good, nah, they're looking somewhere else. So there you have it, our 3 players on the field, P, O, and M. But here's where it gets really interesting. The balance between them is not fixed. In fact, right now, we are living through a massive, massive power shift. And if you want to succeed in marketing today, you absolutely have to understand what's happening. And this is the central rule of the whole framework. It is a zero-sum game. Think of it like a pizza. If you give a bigger slice to one person, the other slices have to get smaller, right? It's the same deal here. If a customer starts listening more to one source of influence, they have to listen less to the other 2. There's no way around it. So let's hop in the time machine for a second. Before the internet, this is pretty much what the influence mix looked like. Marketers, M, had a huge piece of the pie. Why? Because getting good info from others was really, really hard. So you were left with ads and whatever you kind of sort of already believed. M was king. And now, bam, look at this. The whole thing has completely flipped on its head. Today, thanks to the internet, that trustworthy info from O is everywhere. It's instant, it's easy. And because it's a zero-sum game, where did that huge new slice for O come from? It came directly out of the marketer's piece of the pie. I love this quote from Chico Marx. It sounds like a joke, right? But it perfectly captures just how powerful awe has become. Seriously, studies have shown that people will trust a crowd of strangers over the evidence of their own senses. The weight of 1,000 online reviews can literally feel more real than what you're seeing with your own 2 eyes. It's wild. Okay, so we've established the big picture. O is winning, but, and this is a big but, it's not the same for everyone. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. So the really important part is figuring out how much this whole power shift actually matters for your product, for your customers. Let's get down to brass tacks. This is the main tool you're going to need. It's called the O-dependent continuum. It's a super simple way to figure out where your product and your customers land on the spectrum. On one end, you've got O-independent decisions, where people don't really care what others think. On the other end, O-dependent, where reviews and opinions are, well, they're everything. So, what kind of things push a decision over to that O-dependent side of the scale? Well, think about it. Anything with high risk, either a lot of money or maybe social risk. Anything that's really important, like a new laptop for your job. Things you use out in public where people will see them. Products that are super complex and hard to figure out. And yeah, if the technology is changing all the time, people are definitely going to look for help from O. And this just makes it all click into place, right? I mean, think about it. You're not spending an hour reading reviews for clothes hangers or paper towels. That's totally O-independent. You just grab them based on habit, your P, or maybe whatever's on sale, which is M. But booking a hotel for your vacation, buying a new car, you better believe you're going to be deep in the reviews. The influence of O in those cases is absolutely huge. Okay, now hang on. Before you go and fire your entire marketing department and just focus on reviews, it is so important to understand the exceptions to the rule. Yes, the rise of O is the big story, but there are definitely times when good old P or M can still be the most powerful player in the game.
Remember how I said our prior beliefs, our P, are usually kind of mushy? Well, not always. Sometimes they are rock solid. Think about something like cilantro, or jazz music, or dark chocolate. You either love it or you hate it. It's a gut thing. Your preference is dug in deep, and no amount of 5-star reviews is going to convince a cilantro hater to love it. In those cases, P runs the whole show.
And what about us marketers? Can M still win? Absolutely. We just need to have home field advantage. Picture this. You're in a store, at the point of purchase, or it's the mad rush of a Black Friday sale. In those moments, you don't have time to pull out your phone and check reviews. You're cut off from O. And that's when we are super vulnerable to shiny packaging, a good spot on the shelf, or a big red sale sign. That's when M can take over.
Okay, let me tell you a quick story that pulls all these ideas together perfectly. So there's this woman, Teresa, and she buys a fancy self-cleaning litter box. And, well, as you can see from her review, it did not work out. She absolutely hated it. By all accounts, the thing was a complete dud.
But here's the kicker. This is the part that will blow your mind. Before she ever bought it, there were already 240 one-star reviews for this thing on Amazon. 240. People were basically shouting from the rooftops, "Stay away, this thing is terrible."
So the question is, why on earth did she buy it? It makes no sense, right? Well, the answer is all about context. It was an impulse buy. She was standing in the aisle of a physical store. She was completely cut off from all that incredible O information. Her entire decision was driven by M. The box, the price, maybe a brand name she kind of recognized. M won the day simply because O wasn't there to fight back.
All right, let's wrap this all up. What's the big takeaway here? It's pretty simple. Stop blindly following trends. That join the conversation strategy that might be pure genius for a new electric car is a complete and total waste of time for paper towels.
So from now on, I want you to stop asking, what's the latest trend? Instead, I want you to ask a much smarter question. What is my customer's influence mix? Stop chasing the shiny new thing and take a second to really analyze the context. Is their decision driven by P, O, or M? Because once you figure that out, once you truly understand their unique mix, that's when you'll finally know exactly how to reach them.
Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're diving into a huge problem for modern marketers. Why do so many of our old strategies feel like they're just not working anymore? We're going to break down a whole new way to see your customers, and, more importantly, how to match your message to the influences that actually shape their decisions. So, does it ever feel like your old marketing playbook just isn't getting the job done anymore? You know, if you feel like you're playing by the old rules in a brand new game, you are definitely not alone. The strategies that once seemed like a sure thing are quickly becoming, well, obsolete.
And here's the real problem, the core issue. A lot of our strategies just haven't kept up with how people actually make decisions these days. We love to throw around buzzwords like consumer empowerment, but are we really getting the bigger picture of what's truly driving their choices?
Okay, so here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to pinpoint exactly where all this confusion is coming from. Then, we'll unpack a really powerful framework called the influence mix. After that, we'll get into the new rules of the game, explore 2 huge strategic shifts you need to make, and then we'll wrap it all up with how you can find the perfect mix for your own brand. So how do we find some clarity in all this? Well, it starts with a whole new way of looking at your customer through a concept called the influence mix. And this idea completely redefines who or what really holds the power in a buying decision. Now, this is a really simple idea, but it's incredibly powerful. You see, every single decision a customer makes is a mix of 3 key forces. M, that's for your marketing. P, for the customer's own personal preferences and past experiences. And O, for the opinions of others. We're talking friends, experts, online reviewers, you name it. And believe me, that balance between M, P, and O, it changes everything. So what this framework does is it creates this continuum. On one side, you've got the O-independent world. Think of this as the old way of doing things, right? This is where your marketing, the M, and the customer's own mind, the P, were pretty much the only things that mattered. But then, on the complete other side, you've got the O-dependent world. And this is where things get really interesting. Because here, the opinions of others, the O,
is the dominant force, and the marketer's role has to change completely. And here is the absolute key takeaway. For a growing number of businesses, especially if you're in tech, travel, electronics, you name it, your customers are now living almost entirely on that O-dependent side. This isn't just a tiny adjustment. We're talking about a fundamental shift that changes everything about how you need to market your product.
Okay, so what does this new O-dependent world actually look like for brands? Well, let's just say the rulebook is completely different. Basically, a lot of the things we've always relied on in marketing, they're starting to crumble. Brand loyalty, past satisfaction, all those classic persuasion techniques, they're just not as effective anymore. Why? Because customers can instantly find a ton of rational information from other people. And the crowd? They reach a verdict on your new product faster than ever. Okay, so that naturally leads us to the first huge, major shift in your strategy. If the old rules are out the window, what's the new goal? You know, for the longest time, the goal of advertising was top-of-mind awareness. Just hammer your brand name into someone's brain so they remember it. But that's not enough anymore. No way. The new goal is much simpler and also much smarter. Just generate enough interest to make a customer think, huh, that's kind of cool. I should probably look that up. Okay, let's look at a real-world example. Take Samsung's challenge with their Galaxy Note DN. They knew their customers, right? These are tech-savvy people who are going to rely almost completely on expert reviews and what other users are saying. In other words, it's an O world through and through. So, what did they do? Instead of a boring brand ad, they made this awesome video with LeBron James. But here's the thing, it wasn't about Samsung. It was a 90-second story showing LeBron using the phone's super unique features. The goal was not for you to remember the Samsung logo. The goal was to make you so curious that you'd go and search for reviews of the LeBron phone. See the difference? It's about driving interest, not just awareness. But look, this strategy isn't just for flashy, cool products with huge celebrity endorsements. It's actually incredibly powerful for the not-so-exciting stuff. Like, seriously, how do you get anyone interested in a thermal laminator? Well, 3M's strategy was nothing short of genius. First, they seeded the product. They just sent it out to some of the most trusted reviewers on Amazon. Then, step 2, they just got out of the way. They let those reviewers create all this authentic O content, real stories about saving their kids' artwork. And then, for step 3, all 3M did was amplify those awesome stories by emailing them out to potential customers. And the result? It was incredible. This quote says it all. You see, they didn't have to persuade anyone. They just let real stories from real people generate a ton of interest, and that interest turned directly into sales. It's a perfect example. And that brings us perfectly to the second massive strategic shift. If your main goal is to generate interest, and you know that customers trust O, other people, way more than M, you, then you have to stop talking at them and learn how to communicate through them. You know, so many marketers get this completely backwards. They treat social media like it's just another channel for their messages. But let's be clear, a tweet from a big company is still M content. It's still marketing. A tweet from a real happy customer talking about her new car, that is pure, powerful O content. The goal isn't to be the loudest voice, it's to get other people talking. Okay, now this is where things get really interesting, because this whole framework completely changes how we should think about something every single marketer dreads: negative reviews. I mean, if your job is to encourage authentic conversation, what on earth do you do with the bad stuff? Believe it or not, they can actually be great for sales. I know, it sounds crazy. For one, a few negative reviews make all the positive ones seem way more authentic and trustworthy. But here's the bigger idea. One person's negative is another person's positive, right? Think about it. If a pro photographer complains a camera is too simple, a beginner reads that and thinks, perfect, that's exactly what I need. It actually helps your customers find the perfect product for them. So here's the crucial takeaway on this. Your new job isn't to try and hide or delete bad reviews. Not at all. Your job is to make sure there is a ton of rich, authentic, and recent content out there. The good, the bad, all of it. So that every single customer can find the reviews that speak to their needs and get a really clear picture of what their own experience is likely to be. All right, let's bring this all together. At the end of the day, your entire strategy has to be custom fit to your specific customer. You've got to find your own effective mix. This chart really lays it all out beautifully.
You see, if your customers are O-dependent, your main job is to spark interest through others and then just get out of the way, making sure all that amazing O content is easy to find. But if they're still O-independent, then yeah, traditional advertising and persuasion can still do the trick. But notice the one thing that's the same for both? Triggering that final purchase with a good offer or incentive. That's still crucial, no matter who you're talking to.
So the ultimate takeaway, the big idea here, is that you absolutely have to match your marketing to your customer's unique influence mix. And the most important thing you can possibly do after this is to go and ask yourself that one simple question. Where do my customers really sit on this influence continuum? Because your answer? Well, that's going to shape your entire strategy from here on out. Today, we're going to dive into a really massive shift in how companies figure out what we, the consumers, actually want. It's a story that's all about moving away from trying to predict the future and toward tracking what's happening right now.
And it really all starts with this huge, kind of fascinating failure. I mean, how did an entire billion-dollar industry get the most important product of our time so spectacularly wrong? I am talking, of course, about the iPhone.
Okay, so picture this. It's 2007. The very first iPhone has been announced, but it's not even out yet. A huge global media company, Universal McCann, does this massive study. We're talking 10,000 people all over the world. And their big conclusion? This new gadget that combines a phone, a camera, and a music player? Yeah, it's going to be a total flop in wealthy countries.
And they didn't just kind of hint at it. They said it flat out. The whole idea was, look, people who can afford multiple gadgets would rather just keep them separate. So a single all-in-one device was seen as a compromise, not something to aspire to. Wow, were they ever wrong? So, why? Why did this happen?
Well, the reason for this epic screw-up really boils down to a battle between two simple letters, P and O. And once you get this, you'll understand pretty much all of modern marketing.
So, what do they stand for? Well, P is for our prior preferences. That's what we think we want when someone asks us in a survey, totally isolated from the rest of the world. And then there's O. O is the massive influence of others, that fire hose of reviews, media hype, and social proof that steers our decisions in the real world. See, old-school market research was great at measuring P, but it completely, totally missed the rising power of O.
You can really see the split right here. The old way was all about pulling individuals aside into these artificial settings, focus groups, surveys, and just asking for their opinions. But the new reality, the world we all live in, is that our decisions get hammered into shape by this constant flood of online reviews, expert blogs, and what we see our friends using and buzzing about. So to make this super clear, let's invent a guy named Jim. Jim's taking part in a market research study. They ask him, hey, would you rather have more RAM or a bigger screen, a faster processor or more storage? He's making these choices based only on the features they're showing him. That right there, that's a perfect measurement of his P, his prior preference. But what happens when Jim actually decides to go buy a laptop? What's the first thing he does? He goes to see what other people think. He's diving deep into reviews on tech sites. He's on Amazon, looking at star ratings and reading what real users have to say.
And just when he thinks he's got it figured out, bam, a friend on Facebook posts about this amazing new laptop she just got. All of a sudden, Jim's careful research gets totally sidetracked. Why? Because a trusted recommendation from a real person, someone he knows, that carries a ton of weight.
And here's the punchline. All that careful measurement of Jim's P becomes almost worthless, because in the real world, the influence of O, of others, kicks in and just completely takes over the whole decision-making process. The iPhone study measured P when the success of the iPhone was always going to be driven by O.
Okay, so if predicting what people want is basically broken, what's the alternative? The industry's answer has been this really radical shift in strategy. You stop predicting and you start tracking.
The new game isn't about asking us what we might do in the future. No, it's about building these incredibly sophisticated tools to listen to what we're saying and watch what we're doing right now, in real time. It's a huge move from the hypothetical to the actual.
So, let's look at Bluefin Labs. They're a perfect example of this in action. They work with all the major TV networks, and their whole business is built on tracking. They analyze millions of public comments on social media, and this is the clever part, they link those comments to the exact second they happened in a TV show or a commercial. And this stuff has immediate, real-world payoffs. During the 2012 Olympics, one of their clients ran a brand new ad. In all the pre-launch tests, it seemed fine. But in the wild, Bluefin's system lit up with a huge wave of negative online comments. The advertiser saw that data and pulled the ad almost instantly, saving themselves a major PR disaster. Now that's the power of tracking.
And this isn't just for TV ads either. Let's run through a few quick-fire examples of how tracking O's is creating some serious value for some huge brands.
First up, a classic household product. You might even have one of these under your kitchen sink right now. The Scotch-Brite dish wand from 3M.
So, out of nowhere, they start seeing this spike in negative reviews, and people are all complaining about the exact same thing. A new cap design was leaking soap all over the place. By tracking these reviews, they didn't just hear complaints. They pinpointed a specific manufacturing defect, traced it back to an error in the production specs, and yanked the whole faulty batch from store shelves. Problem solved.
Next up, let's stick with the kitchen. Samsung was dealing with a really frustrating problem with a new refrigerator. The company was getting a ton of returns for a brand new fridge model. The weird part was, the product wasn't actually faulty. So what was going on? Well, by tracking customer reviews, they figured it out. People thought the ice machine was broken because it takes about 6 hours to start making ice after you plug it in. It wasn't a product problem at all. It was a communication problem. So Samsung put out a short video explaining the setup time, and just like that, the returns dropped like a rock.
And for our last quick example, let's see how this plays out for a giant retailer like Kohl's. They were keeping an eye on a product that had always, and I mean always, gotten great reviews. But then, all of a sudden, the sentiment just flips from positive to negative. That shift basically acted like a fire alarm. They jumped on it, investigated, and were able to trace all the new negative reviews back to a single bad production batch from the factory.
So, when you put all these stories together, what you see is a completely new set of rules for market research and a totally new way of thinking for marketers.
And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? In a world that runs on O, a marketer's job isn't to be the driver anymore, trying to force consumer preferences down a certain road. Instead, they have to become expert followers, watching where the conversation is already going and then reacting to it, quickly and smartly. So, I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. Think about that phone in your pocket, or the laptop on your desk, maybe even the coffee maker in your kitchen. Which one of those things did you buy not because of what a company told you in an ad, but because of what other people told you? My guess is, the influence of O is a much bigger part of your life than you ever even realized.
Welcome to The Explainer. You ever wonder why some people just seem to be masters at finding the best deals, while other people, even really, really smart people, end up making just disastrous financial choices? Well, the answer points to a new kind of inequality, one that's quietly changing everything. So let me tell you about Dr. Julius Bazan. He's a neurologist, a smart guy who was looking for a safe place to put his savings after getting burned in the stock market. He decided to invest in gold through a company called Goldline. What he thought was a totally secure move, well, it turned into a complete financial nightmare. And that's what led him to say this, right in front of the U.S. Congress. And here's where it gets wild. Dr. Bazan invested about $140,000. Just 6 months later, he needs to sell, and the company offers him only $83,000. He was about to lose $57,000. And get this? This was all happening while the price of gold was actually going up. I mean, how is that even possible? Well, it was a classic bait and switch. See, Dr. Bazan called up intending to buy gold bullion, the stuff that's valued for its actual gold content. But instead, the sales rep on the phone steers him toward these collectible coins. They even use this old story about how the government once confiscated bullion back in the 1930s. But here's the one crucial detail they forgot to mention. These coins had a massive spread. That's the huge gap between what you buy them for and what the company will buy them back for, which of course meant a much, much bigger commission for the salesperson. Now, Dr. Bazan's story, it's more than just one bad investment. It's actually a perfect example of two powerful competing forces that are trying to influence all of our decisions all the time. You can think of them as two totally different worlds of information, and they're constantly pulling us in opposite directions. And check out the difference in their goals, because this is everything. On one side, you've got M, for marketers. This is info that comes straight from the seller. Think TV ads, salespeople, you name it. Their main goal isn't really to inform you, it's to persuade you. Then on the other side, you've got O, for others. This is information from the crowd, online reviews, news reports, things like that. Their goal is simply to inform. Okay, so with that M versus O framework in your head, let's jump back to Dr. Bazan for a second. When he was making his big decision, which of these two worlds do you think he was operating in?
Yeah, he was 100% in the M world, listening only to what that sales rep told him. If he had just taken a moment to step into the O world, a simple Google search for Goldline International would have shown him a completely different story. Big names like ABC News and Consumer Reports had already put out articles warning people about the exact bait-and-switch scam he fell for. All that critical info was right there, just a few clicks away.
And this is where one man's story starts to reveal a much, much bigger trend. That difference between people who check the O world and people who don't, it's creating this new and pretty profound kind of inequality, a widening gap between consumers. It's a concept called absolute inequality. As reliable O information, reviews and articles, becomes easier and easier to get, the gap between consumers gets bigger. On one side, you have the savvy consumers, who use all this information to get great deals. And on the other, you have susceptible consumers, who are still stuck in that M world, and they're becoming more and more vulnerable to bad deals and misinformation. To really see how this plays out, just imagine two fictional countries. First, there's Oberia. Everybody there relies on O information. So a company launches a junky coffee maker, bad reviews spread like wildfire online, and boom, the product is a total flop. But then you have Moberia, where people mostly listen to M. That exact same flawed coffee maker, but this time backed by a super slick ad campaign, becomes a huge hit. The truth that it's a terrible product only trickles out slowly over time by word of mouth. So this brings up a really important question. Who are these susceptible consumers? Now, it's easy to jump to conclusions and think, oh, it's just about the digital divide, right? But the reality is way more complicated than that. It's not just about who has a smartphone.
Generally speaking, yeah, you can see some patterns. The more susceptible group tends to listen to marketers, they shop offline more, and yeah, they often skew a bit older. And the savvier segment, they're more into O information, they shop online, and they're typically younger. But, and this is a really crucial point, these are just generalizations. Because here's the catch. Being young, being a so-called digital native, being online 24/7, none of that is a magic shield. It doesn't automatically make you savvy. In fact, some of the most susceptible people out there are heavy, heavy tech users. So how can that be?
Well, it all comes down to the information bubble. If you're only talking to a very narrow, like-minded group of people, whether that's other fans of one specific brand or people who share your exact political views, you're not really using the diverse O world. You're just in an echo chamber. You might be using technology to look up information, but you're only looking for facts that confirm what you already believe, and that makes you just as vulnerable as someone who never goes online at all. This brings us to the most important part of all of this. How do we close this gap? How do you and I move from being susceptible to being savvy? It's not about using more gadgets, it's about fundamentally changing how we listen. So here's a simple but really powerful framework you can use. First, always ask yourself, which world am I in right now? Is this information from M trying to persuade me, or is it from O trying to inform me? Second, diversify your O. Don't just read one review site or ask one friend. Go find a bunch of different opinions. And finally, here's the hardest part. You have to actively challenge your own bubble. Before you buy that thing, intentionally look for the bad reviews. Search for the reasons not to do it. That right there, that is the true sign of a savvy consumer.
So, in the end, it all comes down to this. We are absolutely flooded with information every single day, from marketers and from the crowd. Being savvy isn't about having access to it all. It's about the choices you make. It's about consciously deciding who and what you're actually going to listen to.
All right, today we are diving into a quiet revolution, but one that has totally changed how you and I buy, well, pretty much everything from a car to sunscreen. It's this incredible story about how we're moving from a world of total guesswork to one of near certainty. So let's get right into it.
You know that feeling, right? We've all been there. You're about to make a purchase, and you just get this nagging suspicion that you don't have all the facts, that maybe you're overpaying, or that you don't really know what you're getting. Well, that feeling of being in the dark, that's the starting point for this huge, huge change. Okay, so picture this. A guy named Dara O'Rourke is putting sunscreen on his daughter, and all of a sudden, this thought hits him like a ton of bricks. What is actually in this stuff? Is it safe? He had absolutely no idea. He was completely in the dark.
Or how about Richard Barton and Lloyd Frank? They were out house hunting, looking at these enormous price tags, but they had no real way to tell what a fair price actually was. They were just guessing on one of the biggest purchases of their lives. And for computer scientist Oren Etzioni, it all came to a head on an airplane. He started talking to the people around him and found out they'd paid less for the exact same seat, even though they bought their tickets later than he did. That feeling of being played, well, that was the last straw. So you see, these weren't just random, isolated moments of frustration. They were the sparks that lit up a full-blown revolution in consumer information, a search for what we can call the absolute value of things, the real, objective truth. And this, right here, this is the core of the whole shift. For ages, we made decisions based on what you could call relative influences. The sticker price, some really persuasive packaging, a slick sales pitch. It's all about perception. But now, we're shifting to absolute values. We're talking hard data. What did other people actually pay? What does the scientific data say? What are the real price trends over time? It's a huge move from just persuasion to actual proof. And here's the best part. Those personal problems led to some seriously powerful tools for all of us. O'Rourke's sunscreen anxiety? It sparked Good Guide, which gives you scientific ratings on products. Barton and Frank's housing confusion? That became Zillow, using public data to estimate what a home is really worth. And Etzioni's ticket frustration? That led to Faircast, an algorithm to predict if flight prices are going to go up or down. Each one of them is like a flashlight in a dark room.
So this is where it gets really interesting, because these new tools, they're not just about giving you information. They're about actively fighting back against the old school marketing and sales tactics that pretty much relied on us being uninformed.
Come on, you've heard a pitch just like this, right? A real estate developer shows you a house and says, "Oh, this one's a steal." And then they show you 2 or 3 other homes in the area that are way more expensive to make it look like an amazing deal. That's classic relative influence. It's all about framing. But then you pull out your phone, you open up Zillow, and suddenly you can see the actual recent sales data for all the comparable homes nearby. Instantly, that carefully cherry-picked comparison just falls apart. You now have the absolute value, the true market rate for that neighborhood. And just like that, the entire power dynamic has flipped. Okay, let me give you another one. Think about the baby aisle in a store. Companies spend a fortune on packaging to send you these subtle signals, right? You see lush green trees, a happy, smiling family. The whole vibe just screams natural and healthy. It's a powerful emotional appeal, for sure, but it's totally relative.
But then you scan the barcode with an app like Good Guide, and the illusion just shatters. A 3 out of 10 on health. That one cold hard number instantly cuts through all that clever marketing. All of a sudden, those lush green trees on the box don't seem quite so convincing, do they?
Now, of course, this shift hasn't been a walk in the park. When you start shining a bright light into dark corners, you're going to upset the people who were comfortable in the dark. The road to absolute value, well, it can get pretty bumpy. As Richard Thaler and Will Tucker pointed out in the Harvard Business Review, it's not like we don't have the technology for these kinds of tools. The real bottleneck, the big missing ingredient, is simply getting easy access to clean, machine-readable data. Without that data, even the most brilliant tools are useless. And the perfect case study for this whole struggle is TrueCar.com. Their mission was simple but radical. Take the car buying industry from relative to absolute. No more confusing sticker prices or mysterious invoice prices. They wanted to show you exactly what other people in your neighborhood actually paid for the very same car. And let me tell you, their journey was a total battle. They launched this massive ad campaign in 2011, and the industry pushed back hard. Dealer associations, terrified for their profit margins, started filing complaints. By 2012, regulators had actually shut them down in several states, and the company was bleeding cash. It's just a powerful reminder that established industries do not give up their information advantage easily. But after a big restructuring, TrueCar fought through it. And today, the average car buyer is way more informed because of that fight. So, what does all this mean for the future? Well, this trend is only getting faster. And it's changing not just the information we have, but the very way our brains process decisions. You know, psychologists have this fantastic term for us humans, cognitive misers. It's a fancy way of saying we are naturally wired to avoid complex thinking. We don't want to wade through a 50-page report. We just want the bottom line. Give us the shortcut, the simple answer, and that is exactly what these new tools are designed to do. And the next wave of these tools is even more powerful. You had companies like Decide.com, which gave you a single score for electronics and told you the perfect time to buy. You've got Brightscope, which takes your entire complicated 401k plan and boils it all down to one simple grade from 0 to 100. And soon, your digital wallet might just make the decision for you, automatically picking the most cost-effective credit card for every single purchase. So the big takeaway here is pretty clear. This trend is not slowing down. It all starts with one person feeling lost and then deciding to build a light. And as long as we as consumers keep demanding transparency, people are going to keep building new and better flashlights, giving us more data, organized better, and delivered more simply than ever before. And all of this leads to a really fascinating new reality. The balance of power has fundamentally shifted from the seller to the buyer. We are getting closer and closer to having perfect information for almost any decision we have to make. So the question is no longer, what don't I know? The real question, the one we all have to think about now, is what are you going to do with all this new power?
For the longest time, the rules of business seemed pretty simple, right? Build a great brand, get customers to be loyal, and persuade them to buy. But what if I told you that entire playbook is, well, it's broken? The very foundation of how companies succeed is shifting right under our feet, and it's all because of that little device in your pocket. We've all heard this a million times. It's been the gospel of marketing forever. The idea that your brand is this untouchable fortress, a powerful asset that guarantees trust, loyalty, and lets you charge a little bit more. This has been the bedrock of business strategy for as long as any of us can remember.
But here's the big question. In a world where you can pull up 1,000 real-world reviews in about 10 seconds, does that fortress still stand? What happens if that bedrock is actually starting to crack?
Okay, let's dive right into this. To really get how much things have changed, we first have to look at the old rules of the game, the 5 core beliefs that pretty much every marketing and business class has taught for decades. This was the playbook. So these 5 ideas were basically the foundation of everything. Let's run through them. First, your brand is everything, period. Second, your main job is to keep your existing customers loyal no matter what. Third, this assumption that customers are kind of irrational and can be easily influenced. Fourth, the idea that giving people too much choice is actually a bad thing, that it just paralyzes them. And finally, that positioning, how you frame your product in a customer's mind, is the key to winning. Just remember these 5, because we're about to see them in a totally new light.
So what happened? Well, basically, the internet happened. User reviews, expert analysis, social media, this whole new information environment popped up, and it completely changed how we all make decisions. The balance of power has literally shifted from the seller to the buyer.
And this gets us to the core idea of this whole shift, something called absolute value. It's really just a simple concept. It's the ability for you, the consumer, to figure out how good a product actually is, what your experience is going to be like, before you spend a single dime. You don't have to rely on proxies anymore, like a famous brand or a slick TV commercial, to guess if something is good.
And this shift is just fundamental. You know, back in the day, our decisions were guided by these proxies. We trust a brand name, believe an ad, or just go off our own limited experience. But now, we make decisions based on absolute value, fueled by a flood of information from real people, user reviews, expert videos, recommendations from our friends. The curtain has been completely pulled back.
So, if customers can now see the true quality of pretty much everything, what does that mean for how a company has to operate? Well, this has a massive, massive impact that goes way beyond the marketing department. It changes the very DNA of what makes a business successful. See, in the old model, a company with a mediocre product could do just fine by just pouring a ton of money into marketing to convince people it was great. Now, that money has to go somewhere else. It has to flow to the parts of the company that actually make the product better, to R&D, to product design, to engineering. You simply cannot market your way out of a bad product anymore.
And the pace of everything has just gone into hyperdrive. It used to be this long, slow process. You'd launch a product and then spend years and years building a brand around it. Today, the market gives you an instant verdict. I mean, within days or weeks of a launch, the collective voice of the internet has decided if you're a hit or a miss. This means being first to market isn't as big an advantage, because a fast follower with a better product can overtake you in a heartbeat. And what about how much things cost? Well, companies have way less control now. You can't just command a premium price because you have a fancy logo. In a world of absolute value, the price has to be anchored to real, demonstrable quality compared to what else is out there. We can all see what stuff is actually worth.
The source material for this has this amazing, kind of quirky example. A company actually invented contact lenses for chickens to keep them from pecking each other. Yeah, you heard me right. On paper, it was a fantastic idea that could save farmers a ton of money. But they were skeptical. I mean, it just sounds too weird to be true, right? Now imagine that same product today. If a couple of farmers tried it, posted a review online saying, "This is crazy, but it actually works and saved me money," that value becomes real and trustworthy overnight, all based on user data, not a sales pitch.
Okay, so now we can circle all the way back to those 5 golden rules we started with. Now that we have this idea of absolute value in our heads, we can see exactly why each one of them is basically broken.
So first up, a company's brand is more important than ever. Busted. A strong brand might get a customer to try your product one time, but it offers zero protection for a mediocre product against a wave of bad reviews. Your product's performance is your new brand.
How about nurturing loyalty? Busted. Loyalty isn't a blind commitment anymore, it's conditional. Think about the BlackBerry. Its users were famously intensely loyal, right up until the iPhone came along and offered a much better experience. Our loyalty today is to the best product, not just the one we bought last time.
Number 3. All customers are irrational. Busted. Look, we all have our biases, but the idea that we can be easily tricked is fading really fast. When the absolute value of a product is easy to find, people make much more rational, value-based decisions.
And what about the idea that too much choice paralyzes people? Busted. Yeah, there are more options than ever, but we have amazing new tools to handle them. Curation sites, top 10 lists, and detailed reviews don't paralyze us. They empower us to sort through all that noise and find exactly what we're looking for.
And finally, positioning is the most important part of the game. Busted. You can't just create a position for your product with clever ads anymore. A company can claim its product is the premium choice, but if all the user reviews say it's flimsy and overpriced, well, that's its real position. The product's actual performance is what defines it today.
So this massive shift creates a brand new scoreboard in the marketplace. The rules of the game have totally changed, and that means there's a new set of winners and a new set of losers.
And here's pretty much how it all breaks down. The biggest winner, by far, is the consumer. You and me. We get better products and more transparency. Companies that actually make superior products also win big, because their quality is now out there for everyone to see. But the companies hiding a mediocre product behind a big brand, they're the losers. And marketers who only know how to spin and persuade, not listen and improve, they're getting left behind.
Ultimately, it all just boils down to this. We have moved from a world that rewarded what companies said to a world that rewards what companies do. The focus has shifted from perception to reality, from persuasion to the actual product.
And that leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to think about. If you were going to invent the idea of marketing from scratch, right now in today's world, what would its job even be? It probably wouldn't be about persuasion or old-school branding. It would be about figuring out what people really want, feeding that info back to the product team, and then just making sure the product's quality is easy for everyone to see. The game has changed, and it has changed for good.